there was a psychiatrist, a very famous psychiatrist. He used to be taught personality theory all the time, and I can't even remember his name now, but one of the reasons that he was taught personality classes is because he studied the development of childhood friendships, like Piaget. But one of his hypotheses was that, essentially, that the close friendships that children develop in early childhood, like a best friend was something like, first of all, a practice trial for a long-term marriage, but also the way that you learn to take care of your future self. So that it was through taking care of someone who wasn't you that you developed the capability of making a relationship with something that was abstract, and that would transfer to your future self.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would think you would need that piece.
Well, that's the question.
I'll think about that further, but here's what I would say. It's the experience of time that children have that allow them to think about time. In other words, if you and I talk about ancient Rome, we're at an age where we can kind of think about 2,000 years and think about what that means. An eighth grader learning about that in school really can't imagine 2,000 years.
No.
Much less imagine 50 years, what the time
or even
scale.
next week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as you mature in the world, you're able to think about time scales that you simply weren't able to before.
Right. So some of it's directly experiential.
Exactly.
You do learn that if you do X today, 2 days from now isn't so good.
Yeah.
And you can make that connection, and that wouldn't be intermediated by some other person.
Right.
So, well, there's no reason to assume that there aren't multiple sources of information that would mature you.
Agreed. Okay, great. So where we get then is maturation leads to an ability to think long term. It's this capacity to think about who do I want to be is something that requires experience and some amount of wisdom. And this is, I know that we share an interest in stories.
Yeah.
And how this can help us set an idea in our heads for, hey, that's who I want to be. I hadn't thought about this because my short-term networks have been having fun and I've been, in elementary school and middle school and so on. But now I'm really starting to think about this and what impact I want to make in the world. Anyway, when you have that idea in mind, even let's imagine a person is religious and really has established, hey, I want to be like this deity or, this role model of any sort. There's always conflict though, right? Because then you've got temptations in front of you, all around you. And so there's always this rivalry. I only mention this going back 10 minutes because the issue of, do these systems work out some sort of nice gameplay? Sort of, but there's also the fact that they're always in conflict. Mm-hmm. You're just always dealing with this, even when you have...
Well, that's also, maybe I would say that even if you work out a harmonious game, which is probably not a bad model for a well-integrated psyche, right? It's a well-integrated game because you're not at cross purposes to yourself, let's say. There's enough novelty that's constantly being infused that conflict's going to emerge. I mean, even imagine you have a stable marriage, right? But a new problem emerges with a child. Well, that doesn't exactly mean that the marriage contract has been violated, but it does mean that now you have a new complex situation to deal with where you might say that not only is conflict inevitable in that situation, you might say that it's desirable because now imagine that, your child has hit puberty or something, and so new problems emerge. The truth of the matter is you actually don't know how to deal with those problems. And so conflict would be useful there insofar as it's identical with diversity of opinion. And then you can imagine your wife has a temperamental take on the problem. And classically, that would be she would be more compassionate and more upset. And you would be more judgmental and less upset. That's the classic male-female dichotomy in terms of temperament. But you can imagine that those are useful stances to begin the problem-solving process too, because it's a completely open question of whether or not the child would say needs a more stringent, future-oriented disciplinary structure, let's say, and to have that imposed, or whether they need more careful understanding so that you can understand what the problem is. There's no way of mediating that without conflict. Yeah. And so the fact of the conflict also wouldn't necessarily indicate that the initial contract was faulty. It's just that You're never going to have a contract that'll deal with all possible novel situations. Hence, possibly the reason for consciousness.
That's right.
Right.
And this allows us to go back and tie two pieces together, which is that, the brain's job is really to burn things into the unconscious when it says, oh, I've got this, I've got that, this is a routine I've seen before, right? But the reason we're always conscious, the reason the brain's always burning a lot of energy is because the world throws lots of novelty at us.
Yeah.
And so despite all our best efforts, every day is full of the unexpected, and therefore we're always in these novel conflicts.